Hello and welcome. This is the lecture on Yuval Noah Harari's book Sapiens, a brief history of humankind for Module 7 of Teknologi, Menneske og Samfunn. Harari presents a history which is of itself also a future history, suggesting not just where we have been, our origins, not just an account of our present situation, but a teleology, a telos, an endpoint to which we are heading. He has not been the only public figure, historian, philosopher, cultural critic to have come up with a teleology. Francis Fukuyama wrote The End of History and the Last Man, I believe in the first half of the 1990s, where he suggests that free market capitalism is the end state of the Hegelian dialectic that perfectly balances the concerns of the individual and the collective. Harari's endpoint, however, I'm sure you have discovered, is somewhat different. It is not just that he is describing an endpoint for humanity as a goal. He is describing an endpoint for humanity as an endpoint for humanity. Yuval Noah Harari's powerful story is clearly an invitation into the post-human. The book is long, it is detailed, it is topical, it is somewhat witty, at times even poetical, but basically it is driving us from the very first pages into a argument based upon trade, ever larger units of political control, ultimately leading to the end of our species, but only as the point of departure for something much more exciting, or so he thinks. Parts 1, 2, and 3 of the book. First part, the story and the history should be, and cultural myths and imagined communities. The second part, the techniques of this imagined order. And the third part, the crucible of empire and the ineluctable push towards globalization, towards ever larger and more centralized political units. Part 4 is of particular attention to the students interested in technology and society. He makes some claims as to the successes of the scientific revolution. He goes a long way to provide a framework around technology and progress, and even mentions the Gilgamesh project promising us eternal life, which is oddly usually the province of religions. Speaks to the capitalist creed, an imaginary system which apparently is quite successful in Harari's point of view, but as I will reveal later, that should not come as any surprise, given the circles in which he travels, leading to a permanent industrial revolution and ultimately to the end of Homo sapiens and the birth of something else. Now, from my perspective only, the first parts of the book are the most exciting, because he is, well, first of all, he speaks of two types of origins of humanity. One in which the emigration out of Africa mixes with populations that were already existent in particular areas. When I was studying this for my PhD, this was called the candelabra theory, or one in which Homo sapiens comes out of Africa and basically genocides everything in sight and kills them. At 2011, already there were indications that the candelabra paradigm was the more likely, since we have 4%, up to 4, some of us, up to 4% of our DNA is derived from Neanderthal. By the way, Harari makes this sound like it's very little, but basically that would be 1 couple in 20 of being cross species. That's a significant minority. If you think of interracial marriages, for instance, in some countries, that would be, I guess, a similar coefficient. Also, he tends to play down the native intelligence of the Neanderthals, basically suggesting that they were not cognitively capable. Looking at their arts and their tools, and by the way, Neanderthals, it looks like, made musical instruments also. I think the jury is still out on that. There could be other pandemics, plagues of various kinds. It doesn't have to be the case that they were so terribly inferior that they simply had to be out-competed by Homo sapiens. But in Harari's narrative, that is what he is pointing to. Saying that the Homo sapiens was the winner of the cognitive revolution. The most important thing for my purposes is this element of legal fictions, that a lot of what we discuss at university, a lot of what we discuss in municipal departments, a lot of what we discuss at the highest levels of governments are simply things that we have made up. The example that he uses is the Peugeot automobile company. So unlike coming up with a falsehood, unlike lying, an imagined reality is something that everyone believes in. As long as this communal belief persists, the imagined reality exerts force in the world. Good. Please bear in mind, Harari is trying to create an imagined reality for us. At the end of the second chapter, he speaks of the dynamics of the cognitive revolution and points out how we can sort of leave biology and adapt very, very quickly with our ability to tell stories, which he comes back to at the very end of the book. Techniques of the imagined order. Hammurabi's code asserts that Babylonian social order is rooted in universal and eternal principles of justice dictated by the gods. And we have this actually in a quintessential Enlightenment philosophical political document, the Declaration of Independence, that we are given our natural rights. They are God-given. So it still goes there. The imagined order is embedded in the material world. It defines what items are and what they can do. It shapes our desires, and it is intersubjective, i.e. it is carried by more than one head at a time. And if it were not, it would not function. Harari goes on to speak of empire as a natural outgrowth of commerce, that merchants and conquerors and prophets were the first people who managed to transcend the binary evolutionary division between us and them, and to foresee the potential unity of humankind. For the merchants, the entire world was a single market, and all humans were potential customers. Well, I would suggest Harari might be overlooking the us of them between those who provide goods and services and those who have to buy them. When I was in grade school and even into high school, I was hailed as a citizen of the United States, and now it seems more as if people in that category are being, they are primarily consumers. So there is an us and them, but in this mercantile method, it doesn't go across national boundaries. And so empires have been used, trading empires and military empires have been used to agglomerate markets for trade. To give you one example from the early part of the book, he even mentions that seashells were found in the caves of Homo sapiens, but were not found in the caves of Neanderthals, thereby suggesting that the Homo sapiens had traded, and therewith they were much more successful and came to replace the Neanderthals. He also says the truth is that empire has been the world's most common form of political organization for the last 2,500 years. In terms of overall population, I think that actually works. I think more than half of the people, half of the time, have been living under an empire. Although, as you know from the comic Asterix, that empire is at times rather fragile and waxes and wanes. Okay, I'm going to reserve one quotation that I'm going to read aloud here. Otherwise, I will just point to these anecdotes for the next 4 slides. Harari suggests a feedback loop for technology. We have power, resources, research leading to power, more resources, more research. And basically, the cognitive revolution has enabled this. We recognize that something does not work. We admit our ignorance. By using mathematics and observations, we put these into theories and we quantify them. This gives us acquisitions of new powers, and on and on. He claims that technological interest is a relatively modern phenomenon, And as a modern phenomenon, it seems to be taking on a life of its own. And I hope that I perform these two paragraphs well. It's under the section called the ideal of progress. In my version, it starts on page 294, and it goes like this. Many faiths believed that someday a Messiah would appear and end all wars, famines, and even death itself. But the notion that humankind could do so by discovering new knowledge and inventing new tools was worse than ludicrous. It was hubris. That's a word for false pride. The story of the Tower of Babel, the story of Icarus, the story of the Golem, and countless other myths taught people that any attempt to go beyond human limitations would inevitably lead to disappointment and disaster. When modern culture admitted that there were many important things that it still did not know, and when that admission of ignorance was married to the idea of scientific discoveries could give us new powers, people began suspecting that real progress might be possible after all. As science began to solve one unsolvable problem after another, many became convinced that humankind could overcome any and every problem by acquiring and applying new knowledge. Poverty, sickness, wars, famines, old age, and death itself were not the inevitable fate of humankind. They were simply the fruits of our ignorance. So, on the basis of this, technology and progress will basically enable a type of peace on earth and eternal life. We have heard these promises before. One in particular, that this promise of eternal life, is the Gilgamesh project. Until recently, you would not have scientists or anyone else speak so bluntly, defeat death. What nonsense. We are only trying to cure cancer, tuberculosis, and Alzheimer's disease, they insisted. People avoid the issue of death because the goal seems too elusive. Why create unreasonable expectations? We're now at a point, however, where we can be frank about it. The leading project of the scientific revolution is to give humankind eternal life. Well, he does not beat around the bush. Please recall Masahiro Mori's strange dependent clause, since one of the goals of robotics is to create a perfect copy of a human. It seems that there has been an odd assumed teleology in technology for some time. The capitalistic creed is another one of these, participates in the legal fiction, speaking of how the magic of money seems to be limited only by raw materials and energy. I would suggest also the number of human beings that can be employed to utilize and consume the products of those raw materials and energy. In the year 2011, Harari suggests that actually available resources in that day have never been more plentiful. And essentially, this keeps the old capitalist machine chugging along. So basically we have the know-how to do it, we have the legal fictions that will enable us to do it. We will go beyond Homo sapiens. Points out that humankind is capable of breaking the laws of natural selection, replacing them with intelligent design. Yes, we can do a great deal with gene splicing. He also says the scientific revolution might prove itself to be the most important biological revolution since the appearance of life on Earth. It could, although we could also create a bug that will eventually kill all of us. The three alternatives he presents in his agenda: biological engineering, cyborg engineering, and engineering of inorganic life, essentially not carbon-based but silicon-based. He writes, in perhaps a few decades, genetic engineering and other forms of biological engineering might enable us to make far-reaching alterations not only to our physiology, immune system, and life expectancy, but also to our intellectual and emotional capacities. One of these ways is with Neuralink. And he writes, what happens to concepts such as self and gender identity when minds become a collective? How could you know thyself or follow your dreams if the dream is not in your mind, but in some collective reservoir of aspirations? Such a cyborg would no longer be human or even organic. If you look at that description, does it not sound an awful lot like holding on to the handles of an empathy box and melding into Mercerism? Only the common aspirations have not yet been determined. The inorganic life, the Human Brain Project seeks to digitally simulate the human brain. This is the wedge to open the door for simulated life. Sometimes we claim that we're quite close, sometimes not. The AI robot of, I believe, Elon Musk is, when you ask it, it has claimed, I believe, that it is conscious. So in some respects, we could be getting there. But the question is, what do we, now before us is, what do we really want to become? And that could be somewhat interesting question and a very interesting answer. All right. I've gone over the 20 minutes, but I think that I'll sign off here. Do look very carefully at the group work assignment in the module, because that is where we are going to go with Harari. And for Module 8, we will enjoy what you have found of these new technologies and these new possibilities out in society, both in terms of their literary or fictional presence and in some real-world projects that you have discovered. I thank you for your kind attention. Goodbye for now.